All right, good morning, everybody. Our event will begin shortly, so I ask you to find your seats. Everybody is, so we're good to go. Okay, signal to start. Good morning and welcome to the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy's second annual day of learning, which will be a discussion on why reconciliation is the only thing to do, featuring Dr. Niigaan Sinclair. My name is Danette Starblanket. I come from Starblanket Cree Nation. I'm honored to be your MC for today's presentation. Our discussion today centers around reconciliation and why it's the only thing to do. And although we are moving forward in many ways, there's still so much learning to be had. And that's why presentations such as this one that we are about to take part in and about to be part of are so incredibly important to the ongoing work that we need to continue doing. I want to acknowledge that while today's event is taking place here in Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon and online, JSGS physical home is located on both Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwa, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. We're glad to welcome those of you joining us today from across Turtle Island and make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territories that we reside on or are visiting. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land you reside on and the spaces that you occupy, not just the land you reside on, but the spaces that you occupy, that you take up. And we all take up space. And to express gratitude for the place and for the people who have walked on it since time immemorial. And it's more than gratitude, it's that understanding of why you're here. What brought you here? What brought you and your families, your generations before you, here to Turtle Island? And to understand that that's an honor to be here. The elders tell us, they say to us, that we as Indigenous people, we are the seeds that were planted here. We are interconnected to the land. We know that relationship that we have with the land through what it offers, all of us. But understanding that involves reconciliation. So I want to pause for a moment so that we can all think about actions that we can take together. It's not just about why we're doing it, it's about how we're doing it. And we had that conversation this morning, and it really makes us consider, how can I move forward in my spaces for reconciliation? So how can we actually actively engage in reconciliation to honor the land and its people? So I'd like to just take a moment to consider that and think about how we're here together and what brought us here together. So before I turn it over to our speaker, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping pieces that are important to us that'll help keep us running smoothly. For those of us here in the room, if you need to exit during the presentation, you can find exits on both sides of the room. We kindly ask that all attendees ensure their cell phones are muted. If you have a question for our speaker during the Q&A, please make your way towards the microphone. It's right there in the middle, located there. And you will be called on when it's time to pose your question. For those joining today via the live stream, if you have a question for the speaker, please email it to jsgs.events@uregina.ca. So that's again, jsgs.events@uregina.ca, with the subject of question for Niigaan Sinclair. And I will pose your questions on your behalf. So I'll have them come up on my laptop. Karen will graciously send those over to me. So we'll get to those questions. If you have any logistical issues during today's presentation, please don't hesitate to send a message to jsgs.events@uregina.ca for those who are online on live stream. The format for today's event is as follows. Following the event remarks, following the opening remarks, our speaker will present for about 30 minutes. Following this presentation, we'll move on to our Q&A, moderated by myself. And then for those asking questions, please ensure they are concise, to the point, so our speaker can respond to as many questions as possible. I now have the honor of introducing today's speaker, Dr. Niigaan Sinclair. Niigaan Sinclair is Anishinaabe from Peguis First Nation, Manitoba. We were harassing him about the Rough Riders here. We just had to, we just couldn't resist. He came wearing green, so we had to jump on that. And it's a ribbon yet, a green ribbon. Niigaan Sinclair, hopefully it doesn't affect them. Yeah, no. It's all in fun. We love each other so much, these two provinces, don't we? Niigaan Sinclair, as I say, comes from Manitoba. He's a very well-known, award-winning author, a writer, he's an editor, and of course he's a professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba. He was also named Maclean's magazine in 2022 as one of the most influential people in Canada. So we're so honored to be able to have him here today. Niigaan's a multiple nominee of Canadian Columnist of the Year, winning in 2018, and his commentary appears weekly on multiple platforms across Canada, from the pages of the Winnipeg Free Press to TV shows on CBC, APTN, and is co-host of the podcast Niigaan and the Lone Ranger. In fact, I think he's going over to CBC right after this today to go do P&P, Power and Politics. So you can watch for him on that and say, hey, he was just with us today, right? Is it live? Yes. Okay, there we go. So those of you who can't get it can record it. His first book, Winipek, Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Centre by McLelland Steward, Publishers, 2024, was a national bestseller that won the 2024 Governor General Award for Nonfiction. He's a former secondary school teacher who won the 2019 Peace Educator of the Year Award from the Peace and Justice Studies Association based at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I know that we're in for an engaging discussion, and so now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Niigaan Sinclair.
Okay, how's everybody doing this morning here in Saskatoon? I was checking my schedule as I went, oh my, half an hour? I only have half an hour to speak, eh? Okay, all right, we gotta go fast because I have 26 slides and I guess we're gonna shave. We're gonna cut off a little bit, which is fine. Quick story though to tell you about what I was gonna wear today. I was sitting in my hotel room and I have, I'm going to, this is like a kind of cross-Canada, one of my many cross-Canada sort of tours. I'm in Waterloo tomorrow, Ontario. I'm in Vancouver Friday, Saturday, Victoria on Sunday. So then I fly home after that. So I have to teach on Tuesday. So I sort of laid out my clothing this morning and I was like, okay, so what I got here is I got my ribbon shirt, which is what I'm wearing right here. This is a wonderful lady. Her name is Joan Frame. She makes ribbon shirts for me. She's from Hamilton. She sort of envisions, she did not plan on this sort of Saskatchewan colors. However, the creation obviously pointed me in that direction. And then what I had there was I had an orange shirt, a couple orange shirts. And the one I really like is the, anyone see, like all these CFL teams, they're indigenizing their logos now. So the Winnipeg Blue Bombers one, I work for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I'm the Director of Indigenous Relations. I got my sister to do the Indigenous logo for the Bombers because she's a star blanket maker, and we filled the W with my sister's star blanket design. And so I was putting that on. I literally put it on this morning. I was like, I should put that on. And then I realized, I'm in Saskatchewan? What a stupid idea that would be. Talk about upsetting your audience to start with. So I put this on, but immediately all of you are pointing out the greenness, which is... that was not intended. Creation intended that clearly. So okay, so let's get started, only because I have only a brief amount of time to sort of present with you. I control that from here, right? I've heard a little bit about me. Think back to grade 6. Everybody remember grade 6? I'm a recovering grade 9 school teacher, by the way. This is all about my career, and I know what it's like to teach in teach the middle years. And remember grade 6? Do you remember when you got the map and the teacher handed out all the maps? All right, everybody, we're going to color Canada. Remember that? And they said, how many pencil crayons? Pull out your pencil crayons, everybody. How many pencil crayons would you need to color Canada? Now, if you're old like me, 10 provinces, 2 territories, 1 water, that means 13 colors. If you're old like me. Who's old and remembers 10 provinces, 2 territories? Thank you. You're all old too. That's good. Wonderful. Now, in 1999, Nunavut is created. Why is Nunavut created? Because Basically, Canada during the Cold War needed to use Indigenous rights, Inuit rights, presence, historical use and occupancy, to make an argument against Russia. That Russia was claiming the Arctic. Right, Arctic, right? Somebody corrected me the other day and said, you keep saying Antarctica, but it's Arctic. So that they needed to claim that Inuit use and historical use and occupancy, therefore they could claim that lands for Canada. So ironically, that then began the process of recognizing Nunavut, which is in many ways kind of a treaty-like relationship for the Inuit with the country, which creates the territory of Nunavut in 1999. And one of the amazing things is you see a government that nobody has ever seen before, a government that works on unanimity, no political parties, and they have a mobile center of office, meaning that imagine if Ottawa was in Winnipeg or Canada's parliament moved to Canadian cities every single year. Imagine the perspective that would shift. Imagine the ways in which you would have different forms of leadership. Imagine the emphasis on different forms of leadership as if the government moved, and that's what Nunavut has. That's what happens when Indigenous peoples bring their forms of governance to the Canadian institution. Interesting. So if you are young in this room, you probably you were at the moment of birth of 10 provinces, 3 territories, 1 water, 14 pencil crowns. Remember? What did Justin Trudeau do on his last week in office? Well, he recognized Haida Gwaii, which I don't know if I have a cursor here. Do I? Can you see the cursor? Oh, wonderful. Haida Gwaii right here, as being Haida territory, not Indigenous territory, not Indigenous title, Haida title, Haida land. And everybody, we have just seen the birth of the 4th territory, because that's exactly the process that began Nunavut. It's going to take about 10 years, maybe 15 years, but you are eventually going to be old like me. All of you young people are like, oh, all these old people with 10 provinces, 2 territories. I'm the young 10 provinces, 3 territories person. You're going to be old too, because those kids are going to be like, hey, fuddy-duddy. And you'll be like, I remember when it was 14 pencil crayons. Because it's going to need 15 pencil crayons. My point is that as the country is moving, as Indigenous peoples are recognized for the very first time in history, the country must shift and change. But you know, going from 13 to 15 pencil crayons seems like a very small amount. But what if we in grade 6 taught young people, young Canadians, and Indigenous young Indigenous peoples in Canada, Indigenous territories? My first question is, do you have enough pencil crayons? But if you studied this, which is from nativeland.ca, you would learn where democracy comes from. Because democracy did not come from Plato, no matter how many garbage textbooks say that. Democracy came from Indigenous peoples. Europeans came here, had absolutely no sense of democracy. They believed in the feudal system, they believed in a king and a pope, and they saw people sitting in a circle trading ideas, disagreeing, but having a group of grandmothers off to the side who are like the Supreme Court of our communities, who listened to everybody disagreeing and said, this is the unanimous idea. And we all went, okay, Granny, just like we do today. That's where the parliamentary system comes from. Where did free speech come from? It came from sitting in a circle and disagreeing. Who else would come up with the idea that when we bag a moose, everybody gets a piece? You get the hind, you get the heart, you get the leg, you get the nose, best part of the moose, by the way, great for soup. Now, my point of it is that that's called healthcare. Who came up with healthcare? No, not, who is the premier that's given the credit for this? Tommy Douglas, thank you. It was not Tommy Douglas. He might have learned it, but Canadians learned everything that is Canadian from Indigenous peoples, period. This is not some opinion woke idea. This is a fact. Europeans came here, and we are now just waking up to the notion that Indigenous peoples formed a democracy, multiculturalism, healthcare, free speech. I don't care how many truckers want to say that it can't, free speech comes from some kind of sense of European identity, or like, imagine if you are back in Europe and you said, oh, the king's an idiot and the pope's a moron. How long would you have lasted? In our communities, that's called sitting in a circle. That's called gossip, and that's called the grandmothers will remind you to show respect. That's what free speech looks like. Free speech will be about communal, constant conversation. But perhaps the most important lesson about anything that I teach or I talk about or that I advocate for is that we are and people. We are and people as Indigenous peoples. We are people who understand a basic truth, which is we are not altruistic, we are not perfect, we are absolutely not some kind of idealized noble savage. What we are is we are people who understand a basic truth, which is that the winter is coming. The hardest thing about our communities is that when the winter is coming, it's not forgiving. It's not fooling around time. It's everybody has to put their hands on the lodge. Everybody must collect the food and share it. Everybody must take a hand in harvesting medicine and making sure you have enough, not just for yourself, but for the person beside you. And it doesn't matter what sexuality that person is, what how they vote, what they say, what they do. That person beside you could be someone who has performed incredible harm, but you still have to stand up for that person. And that's the hardest thing, right? Because reconciliation's easy when you love each other, or when you at the Olympics and we all stand up for the golden goal, or when we all celebrate somebody standing up against genocide in Rwanda, or when we all stand up for getting women the vote in this country. Like, it's easy. Reconciliation's a cinch when we do that. When we all put an orange shirt on, reconciliation's easy. But the other 364 days a year, reconciliation's real hard, because we've been taught to see each other in or ways. And the story is, and I don't have a lot of time, no more stories after this because I don't have time. But the simple story is this. One day in the 1600s, the Blackcoats showed up in our community. This is a famous story from Bawating, or known as Sault Ste. Marie. And the Anishinaabe there had the Blackcoats show up. We had met them before, but the Blackcoats this time showed up en masse, and they said, we want to tell you this incredible story about this guy. He's inspiring. He tells stories that empower millions of people. He walks on water. One day he died, came back to life, and we're like, that's a cool story. What's your guy's name? They're like, Jesus. We're like, we got a story about a guy that can turn into a rabbit in our culture. His name's Winipek. Maybe your guy and our guy are cousins. And the Blackcoats were like, our stuff is absolutely truth, no unquestioned truth. And not only is it unquestioned truth, that your truth is now completely false as a result of our truth, and you must always forget the stories of that Winipek guy. Forget that, and by the way, cut your hair, burn the drums, never ever tell stories, ever, ever again. Only tell the stories that we tell you are the truth. And we're like, nah, they're cousins. Because we are and people. Because that's how you survive the winter. Second place, mosquitoes. We are and people. That is how democracy comes to fruition. That's how multiculturalism comes to fruition. That's how free speech comes to fruition. It's all based in the notion that the person beside me I don't have to agree with. I don't have to think the same way. That we can all be in this together. Every single thing that is in this country comes from Indigenous ideas, hands, and offerings of gifts to the newcomers. Every penny on every paycheck, every project, and we really got to double down on that idea more than ever, because it is the ore that is ripping us apart. It is the ore that was invested in our communities, most markedly in residential schools. It is the ore that has destroyed our relationships with our neighbors. We build fences. We literally say, this is my land, this is your land. And most importantly is we can't share anything. It's like almost we just don't want to share ever. We just want to consistently make people sleep outside, people who go murdered and missing, people who are driven into terrible situations of poverty, diabetes, incredible low life expectancy, boil water advisories. Should I just keep going? How about child welfare? How about the overabundance of representation in jails? Geez, I wonder who I'm talking about now. My point of it is that we live in an or country, and the bottom line is that we are better than this, man. We are better than this. This guy believed it. It's my dad. He believed so much in you that he gave his life to you. And I hated you for a long time as a young guy. I just wanted my dad to be at soccer. That's what I wanted. I wanted my dad to come to my games. I wanted my dad to be there for my birthday. I wanted my dad to be there for my graduation. He chose you. It was only when I became a father that I realized that he was doing that for me too. It took me a long time to reconcile that. But what I realized was his dad wasn't choosing you over me, he was choosing both of us. And that was the hardest thing for me to realize. But during the last years of his life, I realized that not only did he love you, he wanted us all to be better. He wanted us all to love each other, to stand up for each other. He used to do this activity where he would say, everybody pull out your phones, bring up a picture of a child, and now erase it. And that's what it feels like to be a little glimpse into residential school. What does that feel like? It's painful, it's hard. And that's what Dad used to do. He used to educate, you know. He was a judge, he was a lawyer, he was a commissioner, but he was really a teacher. And then he raised a teacher because he said, education's got us in this mess, education got us out of it. When I came to my dad, I was 21 years old, I said, hey Dad, I want to be a lawyer, because apparently you can make $1 million, is what I saw at land claims in those days. And he said, that's a terrible idea. Don't want you to become a lawyer. I want you to become a teacher. Because he knew that the front line after justice, which was his calling, was education. Education was going to get us out of this mess. And education is where we are. That's the front line of reconciliation at the moment. I spend my whole life doing this. I educate young Canadians. I do a lot of that work. I used to be a teacher. I also now educate judges. As just an example in Canadians, I also educate paramedics, police, ministers, you know, et cetera, et cetera. My whole point is that that's our job. Each one of you who, as you get that little piece of information, reconciliation is truly about conversation. It's about learning. It's about the fact that we live in a Canadian society where over 95% of the population has learned misinformation about Indigenous peoples, if they have learned any information at all. If you are 45 and above, you've learned almost nothing. That's me. That's my generation. If you are 30 to 45, you've probably taken one course or a little bit of information. You've maybe heard an Indigenous author for the first time, or maybe you've been to an event. If you're in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, way more than anywhere else, maybe 2 events, maybe 3 events, maybe 4 events. But the bottom line is there are pockets of this country. Maritimes, I'm looking at you. Quebec, I'm looking at you. Ontario, I'm looking at you. Where you just can go many, many days without ever speaking about anything Indigenous, but yet you are thoroughly speaking about Indigenous things. You just don't know it. I teach judges one of the most craziest jobs that I have in my life right now, and this is not a complaint, this is a call. Judges now suddenly have to recognize Indigenous rights. These are people who have gone through the entire system of justice. They make decisions now in our lives that impact our lives every day. And I work with judges who I stand and say, okay, how many of you have worked with the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which you are now required to do according to Bill C-15? You must bring all Canadian law into concert with Indigenous rights. 2 or 3 judges put up their hand. And then I say, am I the first workshop you've ever been given on Indigenous rights? And they say, yeah. These are judges. These are the highest echelon of justice and law in the country, and they are only engaging Indigenous rights for the very first time on a Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. in 2025. Like, just think about that for a minute. The highest echelon of our society, those who are in charge, are, and respectfully, because I'm part of that group, the least competent. That's not a condemnation, that's a call. Now, we have this incredible group of young people that are coming. These are right here. This is my students right here. These are my graduate students, my undergraduate students. We had Kent Monkman come to a class of ours and spend some time. That's his picture in the middle. They are the most competent generation in history. We just released our enrollment stats at the University of Manitoba. We have 3,248 First Nations Inuit Métis students. It's the highest on-campus community at any point at any institution in Canadian history. University of Saskatchewan, you are up there. You used to beat us. We're a little bit higher than you now. That's 12% of the campus. That's a remarkable moment. That's doctors, lawyers, nurses. In 5 years, we're going to have 3,248 teachers, doctors, lawyers, nurses, professors, eventually, judges. Colleges are similar. University of Winnipeg, similar. University of Saskatchewan, Sudbury, Everywhere, basically, Northwestern Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, we are leading in Indigenous enrollment, and that is very significant because I'm going to show you what it is in just a minute. But the Ledger poll this year suggests that 35% of all Canadians, which makes 14 million Canadians, have an orange shirt, will put it on, and go on a march or an event or a ceremony on September 30th. 14 million. We've only been at this thing for 5 years. The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation has only been going for 5 years. We've only been at the TRC, which created the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, for 10 years. We've only really been at engaging each other as human beings, if we can call it that, since the 1970s, when people are allowed to leave reserve for the first time, which then enacts Red Power, which then goes throughout the 1980s, resulting in the Constitution being changed, Section 35, which results in, of course, OCA, Elijah Harper's No, which results in the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. I keep going, right? My point is, we only treat each other as human beings for about 50 years. And that's just really beginning. Like, have we really got there? Not according to the jails, not according to who's in the landfills, not according to who is in the ERs for diabetes, for obesity, for heart conditions. Like, I just co-wrote the Movember report, which is the report on Indigenous men. And the fact is that more Indigenous men suffer from heart conditions, more Indigenous men suffer from suicide, more Indigenous men suffer from basic accidental death than anyone else in this country. Now, the point of it is that I'm saying that here's where we are. And that's what I said to your leadership team about an hour ago or whatever. I said, where we're at for reconciliation is pretty much everybody's got an orange shirt in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, Northwestern Ontario. One day, people take out of their lives to go and think about reconciliation. That's way more than it's ever been in history. We've never seen that in history, but it seems kind of a baby step, if it even is a step. Like, maybe it's maybe it's just a touching reconciliation for the first time. But my point of it is that we are in the most uncharted territory possibly imagined. This is my book. This is called Shameless Self-Promotion right here. But, my book talks about the center of the continent. And the center of the continent, named Winipek, which is what the Cree people called it, is not the city. It's the watershed. The word Winipek is referring to the fact that anything that happened in the watershed ended up in the Lake Winnipeg. And that's an ecological story. It's a scientific story. This is Indigenous science, that when the Great Lake Agassiz melted, created a massive ocean, which then drained into Lake Winnipeg. We created all the river systems. So everything you see there, the Saskatchewan River, the Assiniboine, the Red River, everything was created out of an ecological movement which creates Winnipek. Winnipek is the algae. It's referring to the clouded water. That's what the word means. And Atagib, which is the algae, is created from everything that falls on that watershed: shampoo, pig fertilizer, oil fracking projects. Everything that is good, bad, great, ugly ends up in ground zero, which is where I come from. That's what my book's about. Good, bad, great, ugly. We are the first provinces, the first treaties. We are the first attempts of this country to try to figure out what it means to live in a place in which we are a confederation, that we are a collection of treaties. And it was very, very rocky. There's a reason that the Civil War broke out in the 1880s, right here in this territory, because Canada is built on a notion that Indigenous peoples don't matter. It's fundamental in the law. This is what Dad wanted to protect me from. He wanted to protect me from having to deal with a legal system that is inherently built, stacked, completely hell-bent on destroying every Indigenous person that could possibly be, every Indigenous idea, every Indigenous right. And only for the past 50 years have we said, hey, that's kind of racist, that's wrong, and it's created all this conflict. It's created real inefficiency in the province. And the biggest problem, of course, is that we have many challenges in front of us. We have to build an economy, we have to save an environment, we have to stop blaming brown people for the first problems of the first two, namely the first one. It's amazing how many times we just simply blame Indigenous peoples who are evoking their own rights, often standing in their own territory, and we send SWAT teams and say, oh, well, these Indigenous peoples are anti-economy. Or we blame immigrants. We say, oh, you know what the problem with the economy right now is? We just have too many immigrants. Newsflash, the problem is capitalism. The problem is we're running out of resources. The problem is that we are built on ore. That's the problem. We got lots of money. It's just that it's held by about 1%. And they won't share it because we celebrate ore. It's what the Blackcoats taught us. The Blackcoats said, never, ever, ever think of the person beside you. Forget that person. Cut your hair, burn the drums. We were like, but the winter's coming. Like, how are we going to build this lodge together? How are we going to share? How are we going to make sure everybody has a part of the moose? And how are we going to make sure that everybody is seen? The answer to all four of these, and probably the fourth one, the most important question of all, which is the existential question, what kind of country do you want to live in? You want to live in a country of or you want to live in a country of and? And then ask yourself, what is the message that's sent to you on the flag? It's maple syrupy sweetness. We tell ourselves the story that this country is about and, but it's really about or. Because that maple syrup is full of blood. That's painful to hear, I know. That's hard to hear, I know. But here's the truth. The truth is that we are going to figure this out. It can be very turbulent, or it can be how it is right now, which is the beginning stages of turbulence, the beginning stages of real fundamental change. You know, Indigenous people is growing faster than anybody else. Like, nobody's even growing even close to the amounts that we are growing. The census itself says 42.5%. Those are Métis and First Nations people. Of course, the stats are a little bit inflated in 2016 because they really didn't have an accurate way to account Métis people. And so now what they've done is they've done a much more responsible approach, which is to work through governance models. And so what we have is we have probably more like 35% every 10 years. So the 2026 stats, 2026 stats says that we're probably going to be around 2.2 million First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. That's about 6% of the country, 7% of the country, and 20% in certain pockets, as we'll point out in just a minute. But of course, we are chronically underemployed. Yes, there are 3,248 enrollments at the University of Manitoba, comparative elsewhere. But the fact is that many of our young people are more likely to go to jail, have diabetes, and commit suicide than they are to finish with a PhD, master's degree, or even an undergraduate degree in some communities. And that's a problem. That's actually very inefficient. It is a massive challenge for our healthcare system to inherit this. It's a massive problem for our justice system to inherit this mess. This isn't actually an argument about right or wrong of policing, because I can make that argument too. I wrote a little piece just coming out later today. Shameless self-promotion. I have a free newsletter at the Winnipeg Free Press. You can sign up for it if you want. But I wrote about First Nations policing, and I think that is a key area to think about it. But I'm not actually making the argument for or against policing. What I'm saying is that we need a lot of police, a lot of lawyers, a lot of justice systems, because we keep railroading Indigenous peoples to jail endlessly. That's a problem, and it's a taxpayer issue. This is a cost efficiency issue. Well, we might just be seeing what the solution is. This is the two comparative populations. Red is First Nation status, blue is Canadians. As you can see here, the people in front of me are the largest group of Canadians in history. No surprise, it makes sense. You're in your healthiest stage of life, you're in your middle ages. So 35 to 59 is the largest group of Canadians. But unfortunately, you are the Canadian group that is the second most undereducated on relationships with Indigenous peoples. The most undereducated are those who are the CEOs, those who are the prime ministers, those who are the leaders of organizations, and they're oftentimes above the age of 45. If you have learned anything about Indigenous peoples at the age of 45 and above, you've done it probably of your own volition, or the workplace has demanded it of you and provided that service for you. You probably haven't done it willingly or intentionally. If you have done it intentionally, it's on your own intention because of probably need. But you've probably taken a course. You probably have worked with Indigenous peoples in different ways, lived beside them. Maybe some of you are married to us, especially if you're in Saskatchewan, Manitoba. We are 20% of the population. What I always say is I mean, this isn't like a choice when you're dating. You just sort of figure it out. You're like, you're like, we're gonna date, we're gonna live together, we're gonna work together. Now, look at this group of people right here. That's First Nations status Indian young people. Notice that the biggest population are between the ages of 5 and 19. That means as the Canadian population reduces, the First Nations population increases. And so we're going to see in those red dots exponential increases, not just 1 in 5, soon 1 in 4, 1 in 3. In fact, if you go to Manitoba and you go to Winnipeg, every 100 kilometers you go north, you go up another 5%. So that you're not just 1 in 5 in Winnipeg, 1 in 4 in places like Ashern or Thompson, and then Churchill, 1 in 3. And then you go all the way to Nunavut, it's like 1 in 1. Go to Yellowknife, it's like 1 in 1. Even in some places, non-Indigenous peoples are the minority, right? Certain communities and so on. My whole point is that if you cannot work effectively with Indigenous peoples in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, Northwestern Ontario, you shouldn't have a job at all. No one should employ you because you're going to be more and more in the dentist office, in the doctor's office, in the mall, on the bus, on Tinder. Like you're just incompetent. All you do is create conflict. You don't know how to work with people. It's not that you're a bad person, you just didn't learn. So now you got to catch up. And workplaces that hire people who are inefficient, who don't know how to work with Indigenous peoples, frankly, are going to do a whole bunch of other resources, a bunch of education, just to become efficient. The most important people actually in Indigenous education are people who need to learn that in workplaces are hotel lobby people, people who work in paramedic, librarian, frontline services, police officers, doctors, nurses, everybody who's frontline, basically in education, healthcare, justice, child welfare. Those are the front lines. And then, of course, all the other things that we've created, universities, schools, all those other things, those are all going into those as well. My point is Ontario, and we're not all talking about the people who rhyme with Toronto, but you're coming. You're right now 1 in 20, 1 in 25. You're pretending like this whole thing isn't happening, and you're kind of acting that way, and the rest of us have to deal with it because you treat yourself as the center of the world. You're not the center of the country. The most important issues for the economy and the environment is coming from us, Winipek. This is not like some kind of like woke answer. This is like facts, I'm telling you. We got to stop thinking Toronto's going to save us. And not that you think that anyways, I know that. But we got to stop acting like it in media. We got to stop acting it like in our economy. We got to stop acting like Ottawa is going to come up with the vision. Here's a news flash for you. Ottawa doesn't know what they're doing. We do. We have this conversation every day. We're doing it right now. And so let's have a quick conversation before we get to get this. Like, let's ask ourselves, what are we doing in education? How do we enact Indigenous and in our work? Not because it's the woke thing to do. It's the only thing to do. We have to create competency and employability and therefore efficiency. So we have to ask ourselves some hard questions. Do we hold up the notion that if you finish first, you are always rewarded? That is probably the most or idea I could imagine. That you leave people behind. That you only focus on capitalism, individual self-interest and profit. I can keep going. Like, we celebrate these things in school, particularly grade 9 up. We say the only thing that matters is individual production, is capitalistic collecting credits, and the number one message we give at graduation is, way to go, now get lost and never come back. Which would be, we would never say in the lodge. Ask yourself, where is the land in schools? It doesn't belong. Look at this room. Look at the ways in which we treat young people. We keep them as far away from the land as possible. Recess don't count. When an elder walks in a building at a school, at a university, what's the number one thing they have to do? They have to sign a visitor form on their own traditional territory. Then we say, okay, sign this T4 slip because the tobacco that I gave you, you have to send 20% to Mark Carney. Like, I'm just talking about just basic premises of how we do business. Everything is on the table now. Everything. Every single element, because as I told your leadership this morning, everything Indigenous that we do was never supposed to happen here. And so that means every conversation we start is with no. It doesn't belong here. We don't have the forums. We don't have the abilities. We don't have the resources. The smudge will set off the fire alarm, etc. every conversation must begin with and. And that means yes. That means I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know what it's going to look like. But I know that if we just keep doing it, we can figure it out. And I work with schools all the time. I got to burn through these last few slides here because I want to get to my last one. We have to deal with all the elements of schooling, not just curriculum. We actually have to deal with the hallways. We have to deal with the posters. We have to deal with the fact that art is in this room for the very first time in history, as I was told this morning. We have to deal with all of this. This is the cheat sheet of how you implement Indigenous education. Here's the principles. We have to involve those 4 principles. Third one is the most important, Indigenous relevancy. That's community, that's collectivity, that's the land. We have to say that Indigenous pedagogies matter as much as capitalism, individuality, and competitiveness. And oh, by the way, the good news is if we stop being so capitalistic, competitive, and individualistic, we might have air to breathe. We would also probably have water to drink. And I'm gonna bet that we probably will have an economy that isn't just gonna burn itself out, run out of coal and oil and gas, and we might actually build on infrastructure. We might build employability, or we might depend on the person beside you and we build something else that involves money, and it's probably built more on sharing than it is on or my stuff is better than your stuff. My whole point is that that's what Dad said, right? So Dad said that we gotta climb the mountain together. We can't give up. And most of all is when the person beside you stumbles, you gotta help them up. This is not an Indigenous settler thing because that's actually not what our treaties envisioned. What our treaties envisioned was that it was an everybody thing. We're supposed to have our children marry. And then what are they then? Are they Indigenous or are they settler? There was never supposed to be these arbitrary separate categories of or. Our ancestors said that everybody's supposed to be together, and that's how we overcome pain, suffering, and death brought by the winter or our Rough Riders victory. That was a really wonderful little segue there. But you know what Dad said? We've described to you the mountain. We have shown you the way to the top when he released the 94 calls. We call upon you to do the climbing. He did not say we call upon now Niigaan to climb it for you, or Wab Canoe, or Justin Trudeau, or Mark Carney. Whoever the savior is we decide this week, it's you. And you do it with an orange shirt on September 30th. Can we do it every other day? On one day, we show this world, 14 million of us now, that we can believe in each other and we don't have to vote the same. And we don't have to go to the same temples or lodges or churches. Like on one day, we can step together, and then we do it in other places, in little pockets, Nunavut. Maybe one day Haida Gwaii. Maybe one day in classrooms and in our hallways, and we do it everywhere. It's hard, it's gonna be hard. What I always say is that reconciliation was never supposed to be like an easy change because it involves learning things you've never learned before. But when you see things that you've seen before, then this amazing thing happens. All these young people do amazing things. See that young woman right over here? This is Miauta. Her whole career is built on bringing midwifery back to Indigenous communities. Do you know why you want her? Not because it's the right thing or the ceremonial thing. Of course it is. You know, giving grandmothers back the right that has been stolen from them to birth children and then therefore have young granddaughters and mothers raise their own children in a community. Like, give me a better example of sovereignty. Midwifery should be the most important center of any governance because it is the epitome of what sovereignty is. Miauta is the biggest sovereigntist imaginable. Like, we could say all day it's like some sort of leader at the AFN or the FSIN or AMC or whatever. Actually, I think it's Miauta. I think Miauta is doing more for sovereignty than almost anybody else I could imagine. And you know why the great thing about Miauta is? She's gonna save you $80,000 per birth, which builds a better healthcare system. Because if we can not stop medevacing every single mother to deliver their children out of communities, we can have adequate nursing stations that support midwives, that have emergency services if available in emergency circumstances. $80,000 a birth we save. That means that you will have shorter wait times in ERs. You might also have better potholes, like ways to fix potholes is what I mean, not better potholes. I can keep going. This is Tecumseh. His whole life is on food sovereignty, teaching young people to feed elders and communities so they don't have to be gouged by the northern store. This is Daryl. His whole thing is on child welfare, on teaching kids in taekwondo and child welfare systems. This is Trishelle Bunn. Trishelle is amazing because on this night, this was the Manitoba Youth Indigenous Achievement Award winners. She said, I'm going to run for chief of my community. She was 21 years old at the time. And then she did. She became the youngest chief in Turtle Island history at the age of 25. She became chief of her community. One of these people is my daughter. Here she is right here. It's a proud papa moment. She's a flautist. She spends far more time with flutes. And I'm not talking about Native American flute. I'm talking about German 12th century flute. She spends her whole life studying Germany in the 12th century. And as a person who's raised her in the lodge, in the language, it hurts my heart a little bit that she's like, I pick Europe. But here's the thing about Sarah. She knows her culture, she knows her language. She is a very strong water carrier. Her name, Nimiji Nibekwe, refers to the light that dances on the water. She is a person who believes deeply in sovereignty. She knows about the lodge. She's put her hand on the lodge. She absolutely understands who she is. And on top of that, should she learn more? Absolutely. She's a first degree Medewan. She's got many degrees to go. But she's also a person who's very proud. And here's what she said to me one day. She said, Daddy, imagine if we had an all-Indigenous orchestra one day. And I said, why would you want to do that? That sounds, like what? Like European instruments and classical music? Like, I said, it's all nice and fine, but like sovereignty. And she goes, Daddy, if we can indigenize hip hop, we can do anything. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Then she started listing off all the Indigenous orchestra people in the country. Chris Dirksen, cellist, Jeremy Dutcher, pianist, Andrew Balfour, conductor, director, composer. I could keep going. There are 61 at this moment Indigenous orchestra people in the country. Cellists, violinists, violas. Imagine if they all got together and they made music. What would that look like? It would be in the language. It would be with our songs. It would prove that music is a universal language because it is. It is a language that speaks to all of us, to our hearts, and it would be the best embodiment of and you could possibly imagine. She is truly living an Anishinaabe Cree life by doing 12th century Germany orchestra. That was very hard for me to say because I grew up at a much different time. I did not grow up in the time of and. You know what she is? And if I just go back here for a second, I want to show you something. My dad was the first of an industry. That's him right there. He was the first Indigenous lawyer in many circles, not the first Indigenous lawyer ever, but he was the first Indigenous judge in Manitoba history, second in Canada. He was the first of an industry. He would never be able to change anything. Dad didn't change anything. He could recommend changes. He spent his whole career fighting the reason there was never someone like him that was in that room before him. Every day he was fighting racism. You never got to a lot of changes when all you're doing is convincing people, telling stories, being sassy, getting us in the room. I am the sign and you are the sign of the critical mass. We are the critical mass. That is us right here. Here I am, 49 years old right there. We are the critical mass. Critical mass can change things. We can put up pictures. We can change policies. We can implement curriculum. You know what Sarah's generation is? They're just making whole new rooms. She is the first generation of dreamers who are becoming chiefs at unprecedented ages, who are investing us in ways of sovereignty that have perhaps had not been seen for decades and years and centuries because of Indian acts and land theft and undermining of health. She can even imagine an Indigenous orchestra. That's what these young people are doing. Now, all of them decided they were going to vote in 2023, and they also gave us something we've never seen before. 20,000 of them voted, first-time Indigenous First Nations, Inuit, Métis voters. They joined with 80,000 Canadian first-time voters in Manitoba, the Manitoba 2023 election. Because it wasn't just Indigenous young people who voted, it was the 80,000 Canadian young voters who worked with them, lived beside them, dated with them, who said, yeah, we got to stand up for each other. And this election was run on one basic issue. It wasn't about healthcare. It was about whether Indigenous women matter. That's what this election was about. Whether Indigenous women and girls in a landfill are worth searching for. And this guy solved it in 8 weeks. 18 million bucks. That seems like a pretty low price for us to realize that we all should matter. One party said that it can't be done, it's too dangerous, it's too expensive. One party said it is, and Manitoba's picked this party. I'm not telling you this party's perfect. NDP's created a lot of problems in Manitoba, and they've, in many ways, one of the most racist parties. We only had 2 parties, really. One of the most the problematic parties, not a perfect party, and Wabkanu is not a perfect premier. But I'm telling you that Manitobans chewed this, and it was led by young Indigenous peoples. And they showed us something never been seen before. And that's what really this is all about. You are doing things that have never been done before. That means there's no template for you, and it's definitely going to be turbulent. We can either make it more turbulent by working in ways that are or we can try to work an and maybe create a bit of stability as we go by believing in the person beside you, even if you deeply disagree with them. So big miigwech, and thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry that took a bit long. So.
Very interesting things to think about and consider now when we're thinking about that and piece.
Do you want the mics used?
Oh, geez, sorry. I'm terrible with that, but I mean, I'm
Test, okay.
come from loudspeakers, so I always ignore this thing. Anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Sinclair. That was amazing. So teaching all of us, and we're never, ever too old to learn, right? So many things I've learned here today from you. And it's the first time I've had an opportunity to actually hear you and be with you in person. So I've watched you a lot, and I know your work.
We're on Zoom together.
Yes.
When you were in your daughter's yard, I think.
Yes,
right?
yes, I was in Victoria. So, but we've never actually got to really do work together. So I'm very excited that we're able to be here. So I'm sure the audience has some questions for you. We've got some that'll be coming in, I think, online. I've got 1 or 2 that I'm going to start with. The microphone is here. We've got one standing up there. So I'll pose one question that came in earlier from the registrations. Why is there a constant barrier for First Nations communities who want to who want to take over their health service delivery from Indigenous Services Canada?
Well, I mean, the first thing is to realize that the whole country is built on the idea of paternalistic, Indigenous peoples don't matter. It's built on the notion that we were never supposed to survive. Like, we were all supposed to be assimilated by this point and working in someone's farm field or working in somebody's house sewing for them or being generally servants to the country. Because the residential school system was built on the notion that we just have to create Indigenous peoples into basically laborers and to build the economy of the country. And so every time we do something not that, we go against the grain. And so the idea of control of health services is arguably one of the most scariest thing right up there with membership. Like, the federal government really doesn't want us to control our membership, or if we do control our membership, it's in really ornamental, really silly ways that we get to control, like, I don't know, our payouts or our per caps or something like that. Like, we don't get to control the real stuff, which is our rights, which is the way that our healthcare system runs, or, you know, anything else like our housing, because there's this sort of paranoia belief in Canadian authorities, and has been since the very first time of Confederation, and even before that, that we're somehow going to come over the hill and kill everybody. And whether that be economically or socially or culturally, this is a deeply ingrained Canadian paranoia. And the train line is built on this idea. James Dashik writes about it. By pushing Indigenous peoples out of the way, then we don't have to worry about them, keep them in controlled circumstances. And part of that draconian control is by maintaining services just so that they are in situations of deep and dire poverty. And I don't mean that this is always a conscious position, because the federal government doesn't come out, I mean, politically, I mean, especially in the past 10 years of Justin Trudeau, and say, we really want Indigenous peoples to stay in poverty. Yeah. But what happens is that they treat Indigenous services as an overall program, and we saw this with Jordan's principle, as they set up programs to really just be the bare minimum, or they give it such a loose position, that's Jordan's principle, that it then set up to fail. And Jordan's principle, because it had no definitions, therefore there is such immense needs in our community, from everything from mental health services, physical services, to giving people opportunities to play hockey that everyone in Winnipeg and Saskatoon and Regina get to have, but people in First Nations don't get to have because there's the ice rink burnt down last year. And so yeah, do I think that buying hockey equipment should have been part of Jordan's principle? On one level, I would say I'd really rather that went to direct healthcare needs of First Nations children, mental health services, physical health services. But do I think that every kid needs to play hockey in order to build, the number one reason guys end up in jail? We talked about this on my podcast the other day. The premier just talked about this. He said, I worked with a bunch of guys in jail, and I said to them, why is it that you're in jail? And a lot of them said, I can't hold a job, and that's frustrating to me. And they say, well, why can't you hold a job? And they say, well, a lot of these jobs are blue collar jobs because I dropped out in grade 9. And when I came out of work, all these jobs are sort of like dexterity stuff. Mm-hmm. Do you know where kids learn how to play how to get dexterity? Sports. Imagine that you don't have an opportunity to play hockey. So in fact, hockey or orchestra or basic like hiking programs, outdoor programs, all the things that are traditional on the land learning things, picking medicines, harvesting. Mm-hmm. This isn't just about a spiritual need. This is a physical need for kids to grow dexterity so that they can keep out of jail. So my point of it is like the healthcare system, the constant barrier is that we have a misunderstanding that the bare minimum is not good enough, especially considering all the overwhelming needs. And every commitment that the federal government makes to healthcare is sort of met with a constant bare minimumness, and not it's a ahistorical approach, which is that they don't deal with the emergency situations. Mm-hmm. So we're in this constant state of emergency and have been for a century and a half. And so the healthcare, and then what ends up happening is that then when finally the federal government says, okay, well, here's a program where you can define it for yourselves, Jordan's principle, mm-hmm. and then the needs overwhelm that program, the federal government goes, see, this is the problem with when we give you control over things. And then they pull it back and they make it more draconian. That's the cycle that we're in over and over again. Healthcare is just an example.
Thank you. That is, you've absolutely nailed it. And when in my work in the past, like I think I mentioned to you, I spoke to you about some of the things that I did. Working at the FSIN when I did, that was a part of our discussion a lot, even amongst the policy people, like the policy analysts that were working within that organization. Why are we stalled? Why are we stopped when we've got good things happening? Why does government say, nope, that's enough, no, it's pilot, we're done funding that, we can't fund that anymore? And we as First Nations knew that it was successful. So you've absolutely nailed it. Thank you for bringing that forward and allowing us to really think about that. So is that intentional? That's the question. A lot of Canadians would say, oh no, government would never know, we don't do this or stuff. No, we don't. We want to see First Nations, Métis peoples succeed and do really well, right? But again, that question, back to reconciliation. Do we? Is that what we want as Canadians? Is that what we're pushing government to do? I'll stop there because I know it's question time for everybody else. I don't want to take over the space. I just want to remind those online to send your questions to jsgs.events@uregina.ca. All right, our first question from the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Starblanka, for starting us off in a good way, and thank you, Dr. Sinclair, for being here today. Your words really resonated with me in a couple different ways, but first just let me note that today is Louis Riel's birthday, and both as the greatest leader of our nation, first of all, I thank him, and I also thank my Métis brothers and sisters that are in the room today, most certainly, upon our homeland. And your words resonated with me in a couple different ways, and I also know that he was a founding father of your province as well, in Manitoba and many
officially
of these
recognized as the first premier now.
That is so wonderful.
Yeah.
And Wab Canoe walks in his footsteps, and I appreciate that very much.
John Norquay, the other first premier of Manitoba.
Yes.
So just won, Gerald Friesen just won a book on his life, first book ever written about his first Métis, but beforehand the first Métis premier. Anyway, sorry.
No, and I thank definitely, and Mr. Norquay was certainly from our half-breed side, and I thank our Michif side as well, brothers and sisters of myself. But if I could also just then reflect on two aspects where it really resonated with me. One, I'm actually the only Indigenous faculty at the Edwards School of Business. I'm their Indigenous business lecturer. I also just successfully completed their first core Indigenous course in the MBA program. I designed that and I taught it, and so far so good, successfully on the Sleeks, so that's wonderful. I also course coordinate and teach their core Indigenous undergraduate course as well. So certainly, I know you had to move through that just in the interest of time, but some of those key words really resonated with me around reconciliation, around aspects of capitalism, certainly, how we can do it in a better way. And so if you maybe want to spend another minute or two, if just rounding that out, but if I could also just make the note too that ask a question around how can we create reconciliation in the classroom where even within those spaces, I have to create and bridge together the knowledge effectively for Métis, for Cree, for all different peoples within our nations. At the same time, for white people and from mainstream perspectives, because they're going to be our business leaders if they're not already, as well as new Canadians or foreign students coming here to learn our ways as well. So that's the question on that side. I'm also here a PhD student of JSGS, and very proudly so. And I'm looking at different ways of indigenization, decolonization of institutions, building on my own career that was in Ontario, across the West, working for a lot of major institutions in this way. And in what ways then in those institutional spaces, just from your thoughts as well that you touched on, how could we create that reconciliation again to create bridges both in that institutional space beyond the classroom? Thank you, Dr. Sinclair.
Okay, great, we got you. Thanks. So that question is massive. So,
It is, yeah.
but like I'll do the best I can in a couple minutes. Okay. Yeah. So I often get the kind of criticism, "Hey, Niigaan, don't you give capitalism a hard time?" I think it deserves a hard time. But anyways, the problem is that capitalism is without spirit. Or if it is, as my relatives are really learning in the South, it's like the religion of money and the religion of, therefore, pain, trauma, suffering, or, which is I have to accumulate as much as possible and leave everybody else behind, and somehow the 1% is worth striving for. Like, there's just a fundamental problem with ethics. I think this is a big problem. To be completely honest, I think this is a problem with faith institutions. They have really just somehow bought into this or idea that is just anti-Jesus. If you were to get me to pick on one, I could pick on other cultures and traditions too. Like, I just think that there is a fundamental problem within the kind of cancer of capitalism that is very much leaving people behind, dividing, and will result in a conflict. There's a reason that every world war, every major conflict was preceded by depression. So there's a reason that the economy and the failures of capitalism immediately creates massive death. Like, those two things are twinned. Anyways, that being said, we have to teach young Indigenous peoples capitalism, period. Because they got to function, they got to work in the world. And I'd be the last person to tell you that I don't have a car, I don't have a job that I make money with, I don't have to pay the bills. I live in the society of reality. And anyone who knows me knows that I am deeply about reality. So I would say, first, we have to teach Indigenous peoples about capitalism. And we have to teach Indigenous young people about being competitive and being individualistic. But we can't stop there. We have to make sure that every single young Indigenous person, when they are encountered with that, understands that there is not just that way of operating in the world, that the land matters, that your clans teach you about everyone, that the land, the earth, the water, the air is what our elders have fought so long for you to have: air to breathe, food to eat, water to drink. Like, there's a reason that we connect the pipe and raise the water in the morning. Like that, we don't start off by going, okay, let's all separate and go in our separate directions in the morning. No, first thing we do is everybody must bring your tobacco. We put it in the bowl. We dress the pipe. We raise the water. We distribute water amongst the people. Like, these are not just made up, like, fun little games we're playing. Like, this is law. This is government. This is what this is. And so, like, yes, of course, we all drove here in a car. Yes, we all have to go to paying jobs after this where we'll probably be competitive and be encouraged to leave people behind. But we also have to have lives in which we encompass and bring these things into make it a fundamental part of our workplace. We can't make it as the ornament off to the side and go, oh yeah, we recognize that we are sharing lands with these Indigenous nations anyways, and then let's go back to leaving them behind and treating them terribly. And and making sure that all of, one group is murdered, missing, another one goes to jail, another one's in diabetes and obesity, whatever. Okay, so the fundamental problem is that that's inefficient. Like, I don't know if you all noticed, but I'm not making the argument that this is like the moral thing, because I actually find it's not effective with Canadians. Like, it's effective with our people, by the way. Like, when I make the moral argument of what's the right thing to do, most people are like, okay, Granny says so. Like, not because Niigaan says so, but Granny says so. Because we have an ethic in our communities, Métis, First Nations, Inuit, that grandmothers, elders have real power. I don't think that lives in society. And therefore, what often happens is because we lock away elders, we treat them like they are fourth, fifth tier citizens. And then when we say that you're eventually useless because you actually have to leave the job and we don't want you around anymore. I feel bad saying that about retirement, but basically that's what we say about elders. So we've lost this ethic of responsibility and accountability, and therefore, I would just say that we have to be able to teach young people, but all people, everyone, that we all have to share, as well as pay the bills. And so most of my, I'll use a dad story. Dad was tremendously gifted, and he was also incredibly lucky. The reason that we have my father is because my great-grandmother knew how to cook. My father's an incredible man. He's a wonderful man, but he's not an anomaly. In fact, he would have been one of millions of Murray Sinclairs who would be judges, lawyers, advocates, truth tellers, gift givers, all the things that you emulate about my father. He's an amazing man, don't get me wrong. But I've met millions of amazing Indigenous peoples. It's just that we weren't given the shot. My dad was given the shot because my great-grandmother knew how to cook, and the nuns said, we need a cook. And when she was in residential school, she therefore was separated from the student population, and she was protected by the nuns from the physical sexual abuse that every other kid experienced. As a result, the nuns said, oh, sure, you can bring some of those foods, those traditional foods in. We liked eating those. So she maintained her Medewan teachings alongside was a proud Catholic. And she invested that in Dad. And so Dad could see a bridge between Catholicism, who ran the most amount of residential schools, and our traditional teachings. Like, Dad could see that, and he brought that to his work. And he's not perfect by any means. There are many Indigenous peoples who do this. But the problem is, of course, is that Dad had a little less pain, suffering, and trauma, and as a result was able to give me an opportunity to become a professor, to be a columnist. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. We were on welfare most of my life, but I'm telling you that I grew up with not really knowing a lot of pain and suffering. And as a result, but he also raised me in the lodge. So I always knew who I was. I always knew the teachings. And here's my point. When Dad would walk from the Senate, when he was eventually at his highest point of his life, he would always have 5 $20 bills in his pocket. Every time. Because he knew that people would ask him for money. When he ran out of giving $20 bills, which is usually about a block and a half, and he had 4 blocks to travel to the Senate, he would visit with people and he'd buy them coffee. And his rule is that every person that asked him for something, he would try to give it to them, if he could. And I'm going to be honest, he died from that principle. He gave the whole country his life to the point where he was in a wheelchair, he was weak. He was also a brilliant, beautiful, amazing dad. At the end, but he also gave you all everything. And he gave me everything too. And he did that because he really believed that we have to invest ourselves in all that we do. We have to embody it. And we have to do that with the people we disagree with as much as we agree with. And so that means in our workplaces that those who are, I don't want to name anybody that rhymes with Bevan O'Beery, but it might just be we have to sit with people who we deeply disagree with, who are invested deeply in divisions, who are invested deeply in ignoring Indigenous rights. And we're going to have to sit with them. I would love to tell you reconciliation doesn't matter for this large group of people, but unfortunately it does, because they're often the CEOs, and they're often the prime ministers and the premiers, and that's the hardest thing of all. That's the hardest thing. And so if I were to give you the short and terrible answer for your very long question there, it is that in everything that you do, you should be asking first, what's chapter 1? Where's Indigenous peoples in this story? Everything. That means every project, every initiative, every single thing that you teach. The words you teach, the space you teach, how you teach it. Think about all of that. And you already sound like you've been thinking about those things. And then second is then we have to do our work differently. We have to, all things are on the table. Everything from the posters, the rooms that we work in, the ways that we conduct our business, everything is on the table. And then we start with the principle of we can do anything. And then we work from there and we realize, we got to compromise. You got to bring these things together. And we're going to live in contradiction. That's what ceremony is. Our ceremony is about resolving conflict. We drive in an SUV to a ceremony in which we talk about the earth. Like our elders knew that, right? Which is why they gave us the pipe and the pipe and the water, or those two ceremonies to raise, because they said, okay, we got to reconcile this. We got to figure out how do we bring these things together. Literally, the pipes brought together. Last thing I'll say about this is, you want the economic argument for this? And I was looking it up on my computer. I don't know if you know, I was madly looking up my computer. I wrote a piece about this, more shameless self-promotion. But if you look it up, I said that if we considered First Nations infrastructure to be a project of the national interest, broadband internet, nursing stations, decent housing, fix the boil water advisories, gave young people access to decent schooling, like not chronically underfunded 2/3 for every, in comparison to every other Canadian schooling, we would create, I believe it's $58 billion of tax income from the employability of those First Nations young people. That is a juggernaut. Like, I promise you, no pipeline can be justified in the face of employability for First Nations young people as the project of the national interest. But yet, and I don't mean to criticize the minister, because I think she's just giving a talking point. When I was hosting the Orange Shirt Day with Adrian Arsenault, and we had the choice, I never get a chance to talk to the minister because they don't want to take interviews from me, but they will take it from CBC National. So I got to be part of this interview, and we fed her a question, and we said, why is First Nations infrastructure not the project of the national interest? And you know what the answer was? It's not profitable. And my thing is it is absolutely profitable. I think there's a misunderstanding of the potential of Indigenous young people for tax dollars alone. Like, we aren't going to only be sitting on the reserve doing tax-exempt income. And even if we did do that, imagine the opportunity on that First Nation, because all that money rolls into the First Nation. Like, here's the great thing for all of you, why you should be cheering urban reserves, and I'm in Saskatoon, literally the center of urban reserves. I don't have to convince you of that, is that urban reserves are the most innovative idea, because not only does it build infrastructure on First Nations, but it also results in a recycling of money throughout the local economy. Everybody's property value goes up. Everybody gets more jobs. Everybody gets basically life in areas that are dead in cities. U.S. corporations, Swedish corporations, name me whichever corporation. When they take money, they take 80% of their money and they go invest elsewhere. First Nations, 100% locally. Urban reserves is the center and the future and the most important path forward in this country. And it came from Saskatoon. There's my little Saskatchewan thing right there. There you go.
No, absolutely. And such a fulsome response there, when we think about looking at that economy, because we're public policy. We have economists, and that's part of what policy is. It's around the economy. And I remember Dale Lanaquad. I don't know if you remember Dale. Okay.
Is he still alive?
Yeah.
He's still alive?
Okay. Yep. And he was actually at the powwow a few months ago.
He was in the office beside me.
Yep. So one of the things that Dale did in his early in his career, he was one of my profs in my undergrad, but one of the things he did early in his career was start to build that scenario of contributions to the Canadian economy. And we're talking billions of dollars when we actually look at those numbers. And here we have in our school, we're a policy school, we have economists who are working in this area. Why are we not putting that out there? And Dale Lanaquad really wanted to see that out there. And not just the economic contributions, but you talked about us as scientists. Absolutely. When you think about a teepee, that is one of the most incredibly amazing engineering pieces that we've ever seen amongst us. When we were having the grand opening, I'll make this quick, I'm sorry you guys, but I want to tell stories too here. When we had our grand opening at FNUC, First Nations University of Canada, we had a bunch of those big white tents from A1 Rentals come, and the boys put those up and whatnot, the guys who rented the tents to us, put those up. Our guys had a bunch of teepees, I think 12 teepees set up. And then, of course, we had those other white tents because it was a huge event. Well, the night before the grand opening, a whirlwind tornado comes through Regina, right down the ring road, right past the FNUC building, if anyone knows where it is, the new building. All those white tents were rolling like dust balls right down the highway. The teepees stood strong. They did not budge. Not one. Not a piece of those teepees budged. So when we think about just that in itself, the science around that and that contribution. So I really appreciate, I wish, and I call, that's a call. That's a huge call to policy schools. Show us what the economic contributions are from First Nations, Métis peoples in this country. Let's see this. Let's have some serious discussions around it. So the numbers are there. We know they are. We just got to produce them. So some of the questions that came through, I'm not going to repeat them because you've already, you've already answered them, talking about how to get more young people into education systems, how to get them employable. One of the questions that last question I'll ask here, when we think about reconciliation, we think about reconciliation with government, I hate these things. We think about reconciliation with government, we think about reconciliation with universities, amongst people, amongst citizens, etc. But what about reconciliation in our own communities, Niigaan? And you know very well, and I do, that we've got a lot of things happening right now. And I'm not going to start naming whatever it is that's going on, but we're all seeing it in the news. So controversy around the way, and you talked about the way we run our operations, if you will. So that people are saying, look how you're running this. So we can't let you do that because look how you run this. How do we come together in our communities? Because there's a lot of division. So how do we have, is reconciliation, I guess is a better way to say it to you, is reconciliation integral in our communities, amongst ourselves? Should we be reconciling amongst ourselves?
Well, I'm sure I'll upset somebody from this answer, but I'll just go with it. So I was very lucky when I started doing my public work. So I've been speaking for like 30 years or so, but a lot of teaching. I was a grade 9 teacher, so I did a lot of work with schools and worked a lot. I was a drama teacher, so I spent a lot of time directing and speaking about those kinds of things and working a lot with arts. And I'm a failed, terrible actor. And so that was also my sort of first career. So I did a lot of public work, but facing work. But the real public work that I started to do was Idle No More. So we are in the center of Idle No More. And in Saskatchewan here, led by young Indigenous women, 4 Indigenous women in particular, but many others as well. Indigenous young people, I would not claim in any ways to be young, and of course not female. So I really latched on to that work in Winnipeg. But one of the really great gifts about Idle No More, and really the only reason that it came out the way it did or happened the way it did, and this is probably going to upset somebody, is because we all had Stephen Harper to point our attention towards. Like, the Canadian state, which we had been focused on for a long period, never really unified us. Whatever prime minister, even Pierre Trudeau, sort of unified us back in the 1960s. But I'm trying to tell you that that was an easy stage, I think, of unifying our communities towards this collective vision, because we really felt concerned over the omnibus legislation, protection of water, fighting for tree suspense, those kinds of things. Anyways. And then Justin Trudeau arrived. And I predicted, and I was 100% correct, you will see division in ways that we have never seen before. And it will be a have and have-nots. It'll be a liboriginal versus anti-liberal movement. It'll be an entire with the state outside the room versus inside the room. And all of that has come to fruition. And the past 10 years, while being the most progressive steps in history, has also led to some very deep divisions in our communities, economic vision-wise, and also social development-wise. There's C92 in my First Nation has become this big wedge issue involving those of us who believe we should be taking care of the child welfare system. There are even people who say that the province needs to come back in and take over the child welfare system. Like the same system that created menu of children in the 1970s is somehow going to save us during this moment of crisis for our child welfare system on my First Nation. My whole point is that, is there reconciliation in our communities? Yes. Nothing begins without truth. And so we are still in the truth phase in our
Yeah.
communities of really saying, like, what does it really mean to take control of our own affairs? And what does it really mean to create a system or a critical mass of leaders in which we can talk about who we fundamentally are as, like, for instance, we still have a brain drain in our communities.
Yep.
Most communities, person gets a degree, they don't come home because there's not a lot of incentive, there's also not a lot of jobs.
And sometimes they don't want them to be there.
And so, and there's some historical mistrust around universities. And so when you go and you get a degree, you're not seen as trustworthy anymore. Or you're committed to some other, like, all that makes sense. Like, it makes absolutely sense. What I always say is any paramedic, police officer, anyone in a suit, anyone with a degree, when you go to a community, the first thought is not you're here to help. It's well, you're here to take. Because you've been rewarded to take in the past. And so anyways, my point is I always say to students is that that's your call. Be aware. Be doubly humble. You definitely should never be asked to do the dishes. You have to now triple down on taking care of that fire.
Yeah.
Like, my uncle died on Saturday. Excuse me. Sorry. It's my job to sit by the darn fire for 3 days, no sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that as a nephew, but I'm also doing that because I'm fully aware that I have to do extra work for my people now. Because I get rewarded to do a lot of work away from community, to do work in relation with the Canadian Senate and state and CBC more than I do with my own community. I got to double down. And it's for me as much as anything else to remind myself of connection with that teaching of fire and connection with my community. My whole point is that those of us in university, have to double down on our communities more than ever. We also have to help our communities to understand that we aren't learning a bunch of sellout stuff here, and that we have to help the universities to help to include our pedagogies, and that therefore we aren't set up to fail when we go back to work with our communities. And then we also have to be encouraged in the larger, broader society to stop treating Indigenous communities as wings of the federal Department of Indigenous Affairs, but actually sovereign entities, and that they can make decisions for themselves. We talked about this, I think, this morning, that they can't just be treated as these fourth tiers of the federal government, provincial governments, municipal government, but they are partners in confederation. And I think that as I talked about, I don't remember, I'm losing track of my conversations already today, but I think I said this to your leadership team this morning, is that I think, like, I can't tell you what reconciliation looks like. All I know is that if we stick together, if we keep going, we realize that we've only been at this for 5 years, and maybe 14 million people wearing an orange shirt is what it looks like at this point. That seems small and almost incremental and ornamental and not impactual. Like, maybe that feels to you. We shouldn't give up on it now, though. That's 14 million more people than we've ever had in history. That means that we've got to step up now, and we've got to do that work. And wearing an orange shirt is just such an easy way. It's like the cinchiest, low-hanging fruit way to get reconciliation for one day, for a few hours. We got to start to do it every day, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it looks like on Friday at 2 p.m. on the Dow Jones. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like in the police station. I can tell you, though, that we need it there. We probably need it in police stations more than anywhere else. ERs, courtrooms, jails. Like, where are the frontline services that are hurting and harming Indigenous peoples the most? All of those places. We need it there the most. We also need it in schools, classrooms, boardrooms. I can tell you what I could sort of think it looks like. It looks like 3,248 students. It looks like a First Nations premier. It looks like a 25-year-old who can imagine being a chief for the first time in history after getting a university degree. She was given that award, by the way, for being the captain of the University of Manitoba women's hockey team. And then she said, I'm going to run for chief, and then she just won. Like, I don't know what it looks like, because these are things that we're completely without a template. We are absolutely working without a net now. And we're going to make lots of mistakes. But we have to help each other up, because imagine when we get to the summit, we're going to see things that we've never seen before, and one of those things is going to be our own home. Like, when we stand at that summit, we look down, we go, oh, I've never seen that before. Oh, looks totally different. I remember this morning, I was in that room over here, that's this river room that you have, and they were explaining to me Saskatoon, and I was like, I've never seen Saskatoon that way before, like ever.
Yep.
I was like, oh, what's that building? They're like, oh, it's this. And I'm like, oh, I know that building, but I've never seen it that way before. That's what reconciliation looks like.
Yep.
I almost just perfectly described it to you.
Yep.
If you stick together, you're going to look and you're going to go, oh, that's what it looks like. And it's only going to be fleeting. It maybe be just a few hours, maybe 15 minutes. But then the question is how do you extend it? That's the test of our generation. How do we extend it past the 1 day into 364 days? The 2 hours into 5 hours, into 2 days, into weeks. And then pretty soon we're doing it our whole lives.
Yeah. No, thank you for that response. And, you know, when we talk about the Orange Shirt Day, there was a time when I was asked by media, what are your thoughts about it being a holiday? And my thoughts around it being a holiday, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, is that, well, now everybody's home, doing their thing at home. You know, is anybody even wearing the orange shirt at home today, right? And, you know, why are we wearing the orange shirt? And even when we talk about calls to action, it's not just a checkbox or a tick box, right? It's more than that. It's so much more than that. And so wearing the orange shirt is fantastic, and as you've said, but we know that's not enough. We've got to keep going. We've got to keep doing. And, you know, if we were all at work on September 30th, or if we were all attending a rally, or if we were all doing things together, but somehow we put ourselves into the or space on September 30th, right? Like it's what's happening there. So I really appreciate those responses. And, you know, when we think about within our own communities, how we come together within our own communities, right? And how we start to work better together. Cows and Plow is a great example, right? And how do we stop that division even within our own communities? And I absolutely agree with what you're saying. When Trudeau came in, you just saw this poof, right? You saw a lot of favoritism happening in various spaces and places, and non-favoritism happening in various spaces and places. You saw the results of, you know, what his daddy had brought to him as well, right? So we carry those pieces. We truly do.
Also the most progressive steps in history.
Yes, absolutely. But I hear what you're saying, and I think about Teresa, particularly about Teresa Spence, right? And thank you for talking about Idle No More, because that's a little plug for me. That's my PhD dissertation.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I've been trying. Tell me. I've been trying. So what was government response to Idle No More? That was my, yeah. So I just want to thank you so much for being here with us, Niigaan, today. I know it's been a, you know, just go, 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 go. We've had you going. We're not done with you yet, though, right? So for anybody who's on live stream, just know that we are recording, and that, let's see, where am I? I'm supposed to be telling you something about today's live stream. Following the editing, it'll be made available on the JSGS website, okay? And that's for everybody else as well. So if you're interested in learning more about our upcoming lectures out there, folks, our academic programs, our executive education opportunities, I invite you to visit us online at www.schoolofpublicpolicy.sk.ca. As we end today's event, I'd like to share a sincere thank you to Dr. Niigaan Sinclair for joining us here today and sharing his knowledge and experience. I'd also like to recognize the JSGS Planning Committee, the planning team for this event, especially Marilyn Black. Marilyn, can you stand up, please? Who led in the planning and preparing for today. And finally, thank you to you all, both in person and online, for joining us. We hope you found today's discussion engaging, relevant, and inspiring. I'd just like to call up our boss man, as I'm using Indigenous language here. That's what we would have called our boss mans. So to our lead to make a presentation.
All right.
Right. The problem is you give me 3 seconds to check, and it just fires on my email. So, okay.
So my presentation is very short. On behalf of Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, we would like to thank you so much for being here and giving us this really thought-provoking and important talk, and to spend this time with us. So we're giving you some Johnson Shoyama swag, I guess it's called.
Thanks so much.
And thank you for reminding us that reconciliation is the only thing to do.
Okay. Gotcha. Thanks.